In the model we are proposing in this study, the motif is similar. The stretching of space could only be described by radiation, and it would not be able to fulfill its role directly. This would assign to space the characteristics that, actually, describe the behavior of light. In this case, the virtual fusion between light and space tells us that the second would have the same behavior as a rubber strip. As space stretched, the force would point in the opposite direction, in this case, toward the nucleus. The detail, however, is that there would be an increase of the elastic potential energy in the stretching phase, to the detriment of the kinetic energy. That is, as it moves away from the nucleus, the electron tends to decelerate. This clashes with the definition of gravity, since it and acceleration are equivalent concepts, Einstein. Since light would not be available out of the fundamental state, this would generate an uncertainty in the position or velocity of the electron. The other issue arises, related to the observer's point of view. The vehicle of information about the geometry of space around the nucleus lies in the light scattered by the electron. Thus, the fixed end of the mass spring assembly, which describes the zero frame of the harmonic motion performed by the light, must be occupied by the electron. The core will occupy the free end. This will be critical in determining the exact direction of the forces acting on the core electron system. The warning given to us about the atomic structure is that the fundamental state of the electron is the least energetic and, therefore, the innermost level relative to the nucleus. Let us place the electron at the fixed end of the nucleus electron, in which the space would represent the spring that would be interconnecting them, in order to describe the harmonic movement realized by the light. When the spring stretched the increase of the elastic potential energy, in addition to generating uncertainty in its position, it would suggest that the electron, even without leaving its place, would have left its circular orbit and assumed a movement in the opposite direction of the stretching of the space. As in the first phase of the simple harmonic motion, the work of space stretching would be negative, the retention of light by our suggestion, or the destructive interference of the pilot waves by suggestion of classical physics, tells us that the repulsive force would point in the direction of the electron, assigning transient features of a mysterious antiparticle, undetectable and with positive signal, E+, since it and the nucleus repel one another. This false duality of positions, assumed by the electron, becomes real, with the particles presenting opposite spins. Do not forget that all of this is occurring at a time when the position or velocity of the electron is only a pattern of probabilities, according to the uncertainty principle. After the scattering of light, whatever happened to the electron in its negative spin stage would instantly reflect on its antiparticle, without depending on the distances involved. Time and distances cease to be a barrier to subatomic particles, for we are independent on the constant presence of the scattered light. So, before this scattering, the light would have been everywhere else in space. The extreme limit of the potential energy assumed by the electron could be linked to the increase of the density of the nuclear mass and to the maximum stretching of the space, constituting the insurmountable barrier that would prevent the electron to hit the nucleus. We could say the same thing, but in a different way. Out of the ground state of the atom, the nucleus would be generating an antigravity orientation force, pushing the electron out of the center. This force would become fictitious due to the retention of light. The inversion of expectations, which makes the ground state of the electron the least energetic and closest to the nucleus, is further evidence of the idea that we are confusing the behavior of space with that of light itself. If space could directly communicate its stretching, generating gravity, the electron would immediately jump to its most energetic level or to its excited state. This, however, only becomes feasible and real when the electron emits the excess energy and returns to its ground state. That is, after the scattering of light. Both and Geiger, in 1925, demonstrated that when a quantum collides with an electron, both appear simultaneously, with no measurable time interval that could be separating them. As this communication of the stretching event depends on the scattered light, this will always occur with virtual delay, however minimal. This limitation would be restricted to the observer's point of view, having nothing to do with the subatomic reality. The simple harmonic motion phase of the light that provides the information is the second, in which the relaxation of the space spring occurs in the presence of acceleration of the movement of the particle. When this happens, the electron already appears at the distal point of its orbit, and at its maximum acceleration, releasing the excess energy and returning to the fundamental state in its circular orbit. This may mean that the space should have stretched in the previous phase, even without direct registration, which would assign maximum limits for the stretching, expressed in the maximum values of the elastic potential energy. These limits could not be overcome after light scattering, constituting a barrier for the movement of the electron direct to the nucleus. Although accelerated, the electron appears at the farthest point from the center. This would be an apparent incompatibility between the movement at the subatomic level and what is observed in the macrostructure. Due to the inversion of expectations that accompanies the scattering of the photons, it can be said that the point of maximum potential energy and that of maximum kinetic energy are confounded, at least for our point of view. This is due to the exclusion of direct access to the phase of stretching of space around the nucleus, which in the current model predicts destructive interference between pilot waves. The result would be the virtual leveling of the energetic extremes of the atom, which impels us to the circular orbit. What is outside of it does not exist, because it cannot be remembered. That is, time has been contracting during the entire quantization phase of light energy. Without time, one cannot measure movement of any kind. This suggests that even if space were curved against increasing nuclear mass density, it would remain virtually flat out of the electron's fundamental state. Note that when we submit to the empire of electromagnetic radiation to describe the events in the microscopic universe, we simultaneously coexist with the two phases of harmonic motion of light, mutually exclusive. When one is there, the other will disappear. This can easily be visualized on the model of the rubber strip. Either it is stretching or it is relaxing, but the two phases can never be confronted. Everything indicates that we continually live with a projection of information in our past, which account for the stretching of space, as if it were occurring in real time. This is what the model of expansionary universe predicts. However, the whole projection of image is always in our past. That is, it does not directly account for events that would happen in real time. By the process of exclusion between the phases, the contraction or relaxation of the elastic strip, which represents space, is no longer part of our physical reality. Even so, since acceleration is its main feature, galaxies seem to accelerate during the expansion phase. The stretching phase appears to incorporate an effect that would be occurring in the opposite phase. It should be noted that in this way of looking at events, one can speak with the same naturalness when dealing with a microscopic universe or the events that would occur in astronomical distances. The apparent incompatibility between these two levels of matter has a common justification: the retention of time in the space-stretching phase. It forces us to run after the particles, or just be able to track them in the direction of our past, always revealing them out of their own time. According to the theory of relativity, when space is stretched, time contracts. For the observer who depends on his memory, the contraction of time at the subatomic level has limits that could not be overcome. That is, these limits would be suspended to infinity. What is beyond them ceases to exist because it cannot be remembered. This means that the subatomic particles are still there, many of them without the possibility of being detected, due to our technical limitations. When the time interval, separating the two subsequent positions occupied by the same particle, hitherto inaccessible, can be measured, certainly new particles must be included in our physical reality. Another aspect, worthy of note, is that if the harmonic motion of light were to expose its first stretching phase, in the full course of the opposite contraction phase, both the electrons and the planets would always be in a removal route, even when they pass the proximal point of their orbits. Our dependence on the second phase of the harmonic motion, in which the scattered light would make available the reports that feed our memory, unfortunately leads us to circular and uniform motion, where we do not anticipate the movements of approach or distance of particles or of the planets. This would be a consequence of the virtual leveling of the light spectrum, promoted by the contraction of time and the interior expansionary phase. This leveling would be hiding possible variations in the density of the nuclear and the sun masses, so their volumes do not seem to vary over time. Although such variations in density are undetectable, and their absence results in incompatibility between macro and microstructure, they can be predicted due to indirect effects. For example, Johannes Kepler turned around and demonstrated that the real orbits of the planets form an ellipse over time, and not a circle, as was supposed at his time. However, elliptical orbits, even if they are real, cannot be demonstrated directly in practice, since they would be structured along independent moments. The detail that the less energetic levels of the atom are the more internal points to an inversion in the direction of the forces acting, due to the retention of time in the process of space stretching. The particles would move more or less away from their nucleus, just like the planets from the sun, and would accelerate more or less in the process, because the light gives us a continuous stretching of space. A space that was not always curved, however small, would result in the end of the uncertainty in the position or velocity of the particles, and in the collapse of the visible universe, which could not be accepted. Respecting the conservation of the masses in our normal scale of time, the only viable alternative is the transient variation of their densities. If the nucleus or the sun became transiently denser, the electrons and planets would move farther from the center, accelerating less, due to an increase in the elastic potential energy, predicted in the first phase of the harmonic motion of the light used. As this process would be accompanied by the contraction of time, within the light cone of the event, no movement would be detected. That is, the electrons and the planets would not leave the place, because the space around them is that it would stretch veiled. If, on the other hand, the nucleus or the sun lost density, increasing its volume, the space would be less stretched, promoting a decrease of the elastic potential energy. In this case, as the particle would move less far from the center, our memory would tell us that an electron, or any planet, would now be in the process of approaching and accelerating. Here, we could insert the concept of gravity, acting as a force of secondary nature and positive orientation. That is, gravity would always increase in an indirect way or by a decrease in the elastic potential energy generated in the continuous stretching of space. If you saw things from this angle, you could remove the veil that covers the intricacies of gravity. Further, you could understand why Newton was right by predicting that gravity would act instantaneously and at a distance. The retention of time in the expansionary phase places us in dependence on the local scattering of light. When that happens, we would already be looking continuously towards our own past. Only then can the universe be observed instantaneously, although it is always seen with the appearance it had in the past. As I usually point out, this problem would have nothing to do with the universe. It's all about points of view.